Okay, so this Dharma talk has no other purpose than to benefit sentient beings. If we have a lesser motivation than to benefit others, then it will not be, it will be completely useless. Remembering that we are extremely privileged individuals with excellent conditions of life, that the majority of sentient beings do not have such good conditions for happiness. And so many beings in this world are struggling with sicknesses, even small children, so parents which are losing their children to cancer and so on. Get a few requests from people that want me to pray for their dying children, but adult people dying from different diseases, people that are suffering from depressions, people that are suffering in wars, and people that are struggling for democracy in Israel, in Iran, and many different places, and which are sort of put down very violently by the forces of so-called order, and just in general, sentient beings who are struggling with their mind, their afflictive emotions, trying to find happiness, only wanting happiness, but again and again colliding with suffering. So our purpose as individuals, as Buddhists or people that are interested in Dharma, is really to try to benefit other sentient beings as much as possible. And it's for that purpose that we listen to this talk, and that myself, even though I don't have any knowledge and even less experience, will try to make some blah blah, will try to explain as much as I can. And the topic for today's talk is Lojong, so mind transformation, and in particular the famous Lojong text of the 8 verses, which I was sort of asked to give a talk about. And it's very paradoxical because actually, yeah, I've studied Lojong teachings, but I'm really, maybe you don't see from outside, but I'm possessed. I'm possessed by evil spirit, So, and it's very difficult to get rid of this evil spirit. It's the evil spirit of the self-cherishing mind, which is very strong in my heart. And the Lojong teachings, yes, I've read them many times, but they're there to not just to be read, but to be practiced, to be implemented in daily life. And I feel I'm a little bit, when you want to go into the ocean and the ocean is cold, so you dip your toe and then you immediately withdraw your foot. And then you try a little bit more and then you withdraw again. So you're afraid of going into the ocean. And maybe like that with myself, sometimes I feel afraid of going into the Lojong teachings. I dip my toe and then I withdraw because of the cold, fear of the pain or whatever that might come from it. So difficult to plunge into the ocean of Lojong teachings. Even though these Lojong teachings are really, it's said to be compared to be like a diamond, a great treasury. Because with the Lojong teachings, we can transform the inevitable sufferings and problems in our life. And instead of sort of aggravating our suffering situation and creating more causes for future sufferings, we can use these difficulties and into the path to increase our Dharma qualities, to increase our merit and purify our negativities and to come closer to our goal of complete enlightenment. Whereas people who don't have Lojong teachings and just react with a strong self-centered attitude towards every little difficulty in life. First of all, they cannot find, let's say, a peaceful mind, a balanced mind, when difficulties inevitably come. They make small problems into huge problems, making mounds into mountains. I think there's an expression like that, or making a storm in a teacup, because of the self-centered attitude. So everything can become a huge problem because of that. And with the Lojong teachings, even huge problems can become something minor. So this is why these Lojong teachings are really compared to like a diamond, a great treasury. And those of us who have found them are extremely, extremely privileged to have done so, because it can really help us in our life, to make our life happier in this life and in many, many future lifetimes, all the way up to enlightenment. So I was thinking something like going through a little bit what is the Lojong teachings, then a little bit about the history of these Lojong teachings, the few words on Geshe Langri Tangpa, who's the author of the 8 verses, and then we go into the 8 verses themselves. So I see if I can fill up 2.5 hours of time of teaching. So these Lojong teachings, as you already probably know, Lojong means mind training, no? Lo is mind and Jong is training. So mind training or training the thought. So these teachings is a special genre or a type of a set of teachings which was developed in Tibet, just like the Lamrim or the tenets or Tantra and so on. It's a specific set of teachings. And they came with the great Bengali master Atisha Dipankara in the 11th century when he was invited to Tibet. Everybody knows the story about Atisha a little bit? No? Okay. So Atisha was a great, he was the son of a king of Bengal, and was might not have been the crown prince. I think he was the middling son, it says in the Lamrim. But anyway, so he was leading a life of comfort and luxury, just as Siddhartha Gautama had. But he was also showing imprints of having been a Dharma practitioner, a great Dharma practitioner in the past. For example, it's he as a privileged person, he had access to education, and he also got the Dharma education. So it says when he was just 15 years old, after reading Dharma Kirti's Drop of Reasoning once, he was able to defeat a famous non-Buddhist, let's say a scholar in debate as a 15-year-old, you know. And after just reading this treatise of Dharmakirti once, and having done so, his fame sort of spread, as his fame as this was a Dharma prince. And when he was 20, he had already mastered the different fields of knowledge of his time. And he asked, I think he asked, the king. He had already had visions of Tara, of Arya Tara, Mother Tara, to don't be distracted by all these pleasures, all these beautiful maidens and the luxuries and so on, which is surrounding you in the palace. All of this is impermanent. It will not be of lasting benefit. You should strive in the Dharma. So he asked his parents if he could leave his princely life, and he went and sought out a teacher and learned a lot of tantras. Especially, he was focusing on tantras in the beginning. And as at 29 years old, he had already sort of mastered all the tantras. He had the idea that I'm the most skillful of all the tantric practitioners and so on, until Dakinis appeared to him in dreams and showed him lots of tantras which he had not studied, and which made him more humble. So he continued with his studies, and he was then encouraged to become a monk at the age of 29 by his teachers and by meditational deities and so on, which he did. So, and he very quickly mastered the sutric aspect of the Buddhist teachings, and he continued to seek instructions from great masters, and especially he was seeking the instructions on how to develop bodhicitta, because he really wanted to achieve enlightenment. And he was advised, it seems, it was not that clear, it seems, but he was advised that if you really want to achieve enlightenment quickly, then make bodhicitta your heart practice. And he thought, who carried this lineage, who can really teach me about how to develop bodhicitta? And he was advised that this was a great master in Sumatra, in present days Indonesia. So he went there. He spent many months in the boat to get there. It was not India era or something like that. Many months, hazardous journey to get to Sumatra. And he spent 12 years with this master, who in Tibetan is called Serlingpa, or Suvarnadvipa in Sanskrit, I think. So the master told him that if he wanted to study with him, he should be willing to stay 12 years and study, which he did. And then he learned the techniques of developing bodhicitta. I think especially the sevenfold cause and effect method for developing bodhicitta, but it seems others as well. Because this great master, Atisha Dipankara, by way of his diligence in seeking out masters, he carried the lineages, the transmissions. In Buddhism, this having the transmission of a teaching is important. Gives you a blessing on, makes it easier for you to understand the teachings which you are studying, and it also gives you sort of a blessing to explaining to others. So, as for example, for myself, even though I don't possess merit, I've been fortunate enough to receive the teaching on the 8 verses of thought transformation by my teacher, Geshe Gyaltsen in Nalanda Monastery, a few times. So I would say I have the transmission of this teaching, which must have come down, throughout the ages from Geshe Langri Tangpa himself. So right now, all of us here, we are connected to Geshe Langri Tangpa as well. It's a bit strange, no? When we think about it. So Atisha Dipankara, the great Bengali master, he carried the lineages, what's called the lineage of the profound lineage, which came down from Buddha Shakyamuni to Mayushri to Nagarjuna, and so on, which is about the wisdom aspect of the path. So the different levels of, let's say, wisdom realizing reality. He carried the profound lineage. He also carried what's called the lineage of vast activities, which was traditionally said it was taught by Buddha Shakyamuni to Maitreya, and from Maitreya to Asanga, and then through generations of teachers in India. So, which is about the vast practices of a bodhisattva, the first 5 perfections of generosity, ethics, patience, joyous effort, and meditative stabilization, which is more related to conventional truth. And furthermore, he carried the lineage of powerful activities. And sometimes all of these are translated a little bit differently, but one translation is the lineage of powerful activities, which has to do with the Lojong teachings, and especially the method of equalizing and exchanging yourself with others. So he learned this lineage, he got transmissions of this lineage from, I read, I had to do a little bit reading before this talk. So I checked few different sources by Geshe Serme Tarchin, by, what's his name? Few different Geshes, and then remembering the teachings on my own Geshe here, Geshe Gyaltsen. So Atisha he received this transmission from 3 of his masters, Maitri Yogi, Dharma Rakshita, and then Suvarnadvipa, the one from Sumatra. So he was deemed to be sort of one of the greatest scholar of his age, and the Tibetans really wanted him to come and teach in Tibet, because at this time, even though Buddhism had already spread to Tibet through the efforts of Shantarakshita and Padmasambhava, it had degenerated over the centuries, especially because there was a anti-Dharma king there. It was a sort of Putin or Benjamin Netanyahu of the day, maybe, or a Donald Trump of the day of Tibet, who was, he had such aversion towards Dharma that he decided to destroy the monasteries, disrobe the monks and the nuns, force them to marry, and blah, 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 but like a predecessor of communist China. And that was sort of in the 10th century. So Buddhism in Tibet was in a really dire situation then, and they decided to invite Atisha Dipankara, who was already in his 50s, something like that. And, he was not really interested to go to this cold, barbarian land in the north and spend yet many months in a dangerous route. And then what use will it really be to teach these people the profound Dharma and so on? But he was encouraged again by Aryatara, Mother Tara, that if he goes, it will shorten his life, but there will be certain disciples, especially one special disciple, Tangpa, who would carry his lineage of teaching so they would not be lost, and there would be great benefit to sentient beings. He was, and furthermore, the Tibetans, they made a lot of sacrifices to bring Atisha to Tibet. So the story goes that the king of the time, Yeshe, and his nephew, Jiangshi, they were making a lot of effort to invite Atisha, sending all these emissaries with beautiful gifts and so on. And they were searching for more beautiful gifts. So they were searching for gold. And in one of these excursions in Tibet, when they were searching for gold, the king Yeshe was caught by another king, a sort of an enemy king. and he held him hostage, and he said he wanted a ransom. He wanted a gold. I've read different things, either the weight equal to his body or the weight equal to his head. But anyway, a lot of gold. Otherwise, he would kill the king. So Zhang Shupe, he gathered the gold, but he managed to have an interview or talk with the king before, and the king Yeshe told him, "This time my life, I'm already old. My life is coming to an end. So don't waste this gold on me, but rather use that gold to invite Atisha, bring him to Tibet, tell him about, tell him what I've done for him. This is what I've read, at least, or heard sometime. Inform Atisha what I've done, and I pray that I will be able to be a disciple, a direct reborn, and be a direct disciple of Atisha." And of course, when Atisha heard this, what the kind of sacrifices they made, I don't think he was particularly interested in the gold, but he saw their willingness to learn the Dharma. He decided, okay, then I will go. I will go to Tibet. I will teach Dharma. I will help them. However, the scholars of Nalanda, either was in Nalanda or Vikramashila, one of the great universities, they didn't want him let him go, so they didn't agree that he could just go. But the Tibetans, they promised that they would bring him back in a few years, and so on. So finally, they let him go. But in the end, Atisha was not able to come back to India. So he died in Tibet after having composed many texts and taught a lot of teachings, especially teachings, it says, especially teachings on karma and on refuge, like more the sutric aspect of the path, because Tantra already seemed to flourish into Tibet, but they didn't have the foundation of sutra to practice it. So Atisha made a lot of effort to teach the sutra path to the Tibetans, to the point that he got the nickname of being the Karma Lama or the Refuge Lama. That was his nickname, which sort of pleased him. And he did find a lot of skilled, able disciples who could carry his lineage. And he gave them the lineages. He had the profound lineage, the vast lineage, but for the lineage of powerful activities, it is said that he kept that one secret, and he only taught it to Tangpa, his heart disciples. Tangpa, I think, Gyalwe Jungne, who had been prophesied by Tara. And then Tangpa, he asked, why me? Why me? Why do you don't give it to others? He said, because you are the only one who is ready to receive the Lojong teachings, showing sort of the preparations that you need in order to practice Lojong, especially the method of equalizing and exchanging yourself with others. Dromtompa then, he also had many disciples. He started the Reting monastery in Tibet, and what's called the Kadampa tradition. Again, he taught widely, but the lineage of powerful activities, the Lojong teachings, he taught, if I got it right, he taught it to four of his closest disciples. So the three which are called the Kadampa brothers, maybe you've heard their name before, like Potowa, Shengawa, Pulshungwa, and then Kampalungpa. I know it's like weird names, but when you study the Lamrim Chenmo, for example, you see Tsongkhapa is citing these masters a lot, because they had a lot of like pithy sayings, very, to the point, without any mumbo jumbo, and very a bit harsh as well. Because these were, when you speak about Kadampa practitioner or Kadampa geshes, these were like hardcore practitioners which endured a lot of hardships, led very simple ascetic lives outwardly, just like you would maybe think about present day forest monks and so on, but not with the intention of self-liberation, but with the much incredible cosmic motivation to benefit all sentient beings, including us. So they were able to bear all these hardships, and not for their own sake, but for the sake of all sentient beings. So when we speak about Kadampa Geshes, this is really like hardcore practitioners living ascetic lives, but with a bodhicitta motivation. And so among these 4 disciples, then Otoa Rinchen Sel, he also had many disciples, so many disciples that it became a huge burden to him. I remember reading in the Lamrim, he said that if disciples, they come too close, it becomes just an extra burden. But if they stay too far, it's of no benefit for them either. So you should have something like something in between, not being too close to your guru, because it becomes like a burden for the guru, and it can be a danger for the disciple as well, because you start noticing all the faults or potential faults of your guru. But if there's, let's say, no closeness at all, then you will not receive the benefit of instructions, teachings, transmissions, initiations, and so on. So we need something like a middling relationship. Normally. Some can stay very, very close. Some might be able to stay very distant and still benefit. Like not distant mentally, but I'm talking about physically, right? So anyway, Patoe had many disciples, and two of them was Langri Tangpa and Sharawa. And to these 2 disciples, he gave the Lojong teachings. And it seems that Langri Tangpa then was the first one to write the teachings down, the Lojong teachings down. One example of that is the 8 verses of thought transformation. I have not seen any other text by Langri Tangpa due to my own sort of lack of research and ignorance and so on, but I'm sure that there are many. I read that he taught some aspects of the Lojong teachings widely, publicly, but the method of equalizing and exchanging self with others, he kept secret, and he taught taught very secretly. And the reason being, of course, that these teachings can really put off people. Instead of drawing people towards Dharma, instead of inspiring them to teach Dharma, Dharma becomes a scary thing. It sounds like you have to suffer all the time for the benefit of others. It can sound almost masochistic and so on. So most people are not ready to hear the teachings and to practice them. And even people like myself who think I'm ready to hear them and practice them is not actually ready, It's like putting the toe in the water and then withdrawing it directly afterwards. Anyway, so Langri Tangpa was not the one who taught the Lojong teachings widely, but it was another Geshe who came after him, Geshe Shikawa. Now, Geshe Shikawa was a great scholar of the day and practitioner and so on, But what I've read from his bio is that he felt something was missing in his practice. You know, he had memorized so many texts, he had studied so many texts, and probably had a pure practice already, free from worldly concerns and so on, but he felt that something was really missing in his practice. And one day he overheard somebody reciting some verses from the 8 verses of thought transformation. And he was like, whoa, what is this? Completely amazed at what he heard. So he inquired who is the teacher of these, who is the author of these verses, and he decided to travel to Lhasa to find the teacher. And at that time, when he arrived in Lhasa, Langri Tangpa had already died. So Geshe Shikawa was only like 15 years old when Langri Tangpa died. So when he arrived in Lhasa, Langri Tangpa had already died, but his brother in the Dharma, Sharava, was still alive. And he was teaching in a house in Lhasa. So when Shikawa came to the house, Langri Tangpa came to the house. Shirawa was teaching the Asanga's Shravaka levels. So Shravaka is a listener. It's one striving for personal liberation by way of practicing the 3 higher trainings. And probably the Shravaka levels, although I have not studied this myself, but it sounds like it's about the Hinayana path. Although Asanga himself was a great bodhisattva and teaching the Mahayana path. And so when Langri Tangpa heard the teachings by Sharava on the Shravaka levels, he was completely disappointed. What is this? I came to hear the great Lojong teachings, how to develop bodhicitta, and now this guy is explaining the Hinayana path. It's not what I've searched for. So he sought out Sharava in private, and Sharava didn't see. He asked Sharava to receive teachings, and Sharava said something like, I gave you already everything that I know. What else can you ask for? He was not too enthusiastic seeing Langri Tangpa, but Langri Tangpa was insisting and showing a bit of despair of receiving the Lojong teachings. And so Sharava decided that maybe this person was a fit vessel for hearing the Lojong teachings. So he gave them to him. He gave the transmission of the Lojong teachings to him, and including the 8 verses of thought transformation. So it's said that Geshe Shikawa was the one that started to teach the Lojong teachings more publicly, maybe 100 or 150 years after Atisha had already spread them to Tibet. The reason being that, there were 2 reasons. My own Geshe Gyaltsen has explained that there were 2 reasons for this, that he decided that now was the time to teach the Lojong teachings more widely. One reason was that Shikawa had a brother who was not interested in Dharma, was very skeptical. So there were even Tibetans who were not completely, faithful to the Dharma, which sometimes, it shouldn't be a surprise maybe, but because I already mentioned Langri Tangpa, the Donald Trump of the day, or the anti-Dharma king. But anyway, Shikawa had a brother who was not into Dharma. He was very skeptical, and he thought didn't have faith. Now Geshe Shikawa decided to teach the Lojong teachings to a group of lepers, to teach the equalizing and exchanging self with others to a group of lepers. And he guided them into the practice. And by practicing this method, they were able to heal themselves of leprosy. And So this was not only amazing in and of itself, that by practicing these Lojong teachings and showing that, this phenomena of mind over matter, that by training our mind, it has a very clear, how do you say, influence, effect on physical reality. This was the sort of the evidence or the proof which convinced the brother of Shikawa to become a faithful Dharma practitioner. So seeing what this method had done for the lepers and how it had transformed his brother as well, he decided to teach the Lojong teachings, even though most people are not fit. And the other reason was that he thought that if we don't teach this Lojong and the method of equalizing and changing others more widely, it will be lost. Finally, it will be lost, and this is a tragedy. So Geshe Shikawa was the one that taught these Lojong teachings more widely. So these Lojong teachings is not like they were inventions by the Tibetan. They didn't invent it, but they greatly developed this genre of teachings. We can already see predecessors in the Shastras, like the Prescience Garland of Nagarjuna, especially one verse which says something like, may I cherish all living beings like my own body, may I cherish them much more than myself, may all their suffering ripen upon me, and may all my happiness ripen upon them. So only this one verse, it is showing the method of equalizing and exchanging self with others. And also in Shantideva's Bodhisattva Shari Avatara, engaging in Bodhisattva's way of life, we see in chapter 8 very more detailed meditation of how to equalize and exchange self with others with regard to people who are superior to us, equal to us, and inferior to us. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama says that these Lojong teachings can also be found in various sutras, for example, the Vimalakirti Sutra and the Akashagarbha Sutra and others. So there are predecessors in the Indian literature, but the Tibetans, they greatly developed this genre of teachings and really enriching Buddhism. Not just being happy what had been handed down to them, but with creativity and personal experience developing it. So that might be something that we Westerners at one point will be able to do as well, when Dharma is, let's say, more established in the West, that we too will be able to use various means, including technology, to develop the Dharma. And also, I think in other traditions, like in other religious traditions, we can find something like Lojong teachings. Like St. Francis was talking about, how there is no enemy. There are no enemies, he said. Like nobody is doing you harm. Everybody is your benefactor. The only enemy is yourself. And there's no other enemy than yourself. So this, somebody who studied Lojong knows that this is a Lojong teaching. Jesus also, when he's talking about turning the other cheek or going, if somebody asks you to go 1 mile, you go 10, or you go 2, or whatever it is. Somebody asks you for your jacket, you give him your pants. These are Lojong teachings. And also in Sufism, you can find Lojong teachings for sure. So it's not a phenomena which is, let's say, very exclusive to Tibetan Buddhism, but it's very much developed and has a label in Tibetan Buddhism. Then before the pause, maybe I say a few words, because we have a pause in 50 minutes, right? Is it? Yeah. So a few words on Langri Tangpa as well, the author of this text of 8 verses of thought transformation. So it seems there's not so much information available, at least in English, and I've never heard like a long biography of his life. But I remember Geshe Gyaltsen telling me a few things, telling us a few things in teachings. And that first of all, that he was a real deal bodhisattva. He had used Lojong teachings to develop authentic bodhicitta, and he is hailed in all these Lojong teachings. By the way, they are not like exclusive to Gelug tradition, even though the Gelug tradition incorporated lots of the Kadampas, but they're available in the Nyingma, in the Kagyu, in the Shakya as well. And Geshe Langri Tangpa is like hailed as a great bodhisattva in all the traditions, as far as I know. He was also known as black-faced Langri Tangpa. Now in Tibetan, they use this black-faced as a bit, I don't like this phrase a lot, but it's sort of to show that you're frowning, that you're angry, and so on. They use a lot of this white and black to designate virtue and non-virtue. I think in these days it's not so fit to use it like that, but these were red-faced Tibetans who had never met, they had never met any whitey like myself or any black person or anything. They were just so he was called black-faced Langri Tangpa because he always had like this depressed demeanor. It said he only laughed 2 times in his life, or only smiled 2 times in his life. So his disciples told him, it's not so nice for people that come and see you that you're always having this frowning face and you look sad all the time. It's not inspiring. Can't you try to smile a bit more and be, And he said, well, no, but he said something like, when I think about the suffering of sentient beings from samsara, like I don't feel any reason to smile and be happy. So he couldn't manage. It's that he smiled. The one time he smiled that I can remember was, I think once when he was sitting and doing some practice, and I think he saw a mouse trying to remove something from his altar, some offering from his altar, but it was it was too heavy for the mouse. So then the mouse went away. He came back with his mice friend, and they with a joint effort, they were able to take the offering. And this made him smile. Even to the point I read, but this sounds a bit incredulous to me, that the one mouse, he put the offering on his stomach, and the other mice, they used him as, they pulled the mouse with the thing on the stomach, with the offering on the stomach. They used him as a sort of a carpet or something. And this made him smile. Oh, I don't know about that. But it's also said, that showing that he was really trying to practice, or he was really practicing these Lojong teachings himself. For example, like accepting defeat and giving the victory to others. Let's say, at one point when he was teaching a gathering of monks, his disciples, a woman came into the Gompa with a baby in her arms. And she said, she walked up to Langri Tangpa and said, this child is yours. Here, you take care of it. And Langri Tangpa took the child. He didn't say anything. And then you can imagine, the accusation of a monk having fathered a child and in front of your disciples in a gathering and so on. So he took the child without saying anything, it seems. And then he raised the child for how long, I can't remember. And a few years later, the woman came back to reclaim the child. So what I read with regard to this story, this is how my Geshe explained it, but what I read was that this woman, she had already had several children which had died in let's say in childbirth or in early age. And she had received sort of the prediction by somebody that if she would give this child to the Bodhisattva Langri Tangpa, then it would survive. So she decided to do just that. So, and she explained this, why she had done what she had done. Point being that Langri Tangpa, without any concern for his reputation and so on, with the discomfort it requires to raise a child, he did it. And one final story which sort of shows his, let's say, his bodhicitta motivation was that when he was dying, he was lying dying, he showed some aspect of being distressed, being shown anxiety, and the disciples got worried. And they asked him, what's wrong? And Langri Tangpa was saying that something like, all my life, I've been praying to be reborn in the hell realms, to be able to benefit sentient beings there. And now I'm having visions of, I think it was Amitabha Pure Land of Sukhavati, and that I'm going to be reborn there. Please make prayers to, so that I can be reborn in hell. So this kind of mentality, again, the Bodhisattva attitude, wishing to take suffering rebirth for the benefit of others, wishing not, let's say, for your own excellent conditions, to be reborn in the best possible circumstances, with resources and whatever, the most peaceful family and so on, but really to be reborn wherever is beneficial. This is quite something, and this is how certain people actually pray, sincerely or not sincerely, but some people do seem to practice it sincerely. For example, I know a very inspiring monk who's living here in nearby Nalanda, practicing for many years, doing lots of nungnes and so on. And he once told me, he told me that he also had been praying to be reborn in hell before he degenerated, he said, before his aspiration and motivation and so on, before he degenerated as a Dharma practitioner. For a long time, he was praying to be reborn in the hell realms to help sentient beings. And when he said that, I felt that was quite sincere, what he was saying. I'm also reading a quite beautiful biography about a guy who was born in America and who was facing all sorts of problems. It's not like he was born in a Buddhist family, nothing like that, or Buddhist friends, but he showed some signs already from childbirth that he was, having visions and dreams, and even making some spontaneous prayers, which we seemed very Buddhists. Like he said that he, as a young child, because he was a Christian, he was brought up as a Christian in the beginning at least. He said as a young child, when he had done something wrong, he would immediately go down and pray that something like, oh, may I experience the effects of this action in this life as soon as possible, so I don't have to carry it with me into next life. And this was without any influence from anybody, right? And this continued into his adulthood until, he met Buddhism, let's say, not as a child, but when he was in his 20s, something like that. And it might be, and then he says he has clear memories being a monk in a past life, remembering how he died and so on. And other lamas, great lamas, also told him that he had been a monk in his past life and so on. So maybe he as well had made these prayers, truly born in, let's say, in impure lands where the Dharma had not spread, in order to be a benefit to others. A bit, let's say, a Langri Tangpa prayer, the Bodhisattva attitude. Okay. So let's stop here for 15 or 20 minutes. And then we come back, and hopefully we will be able to go then into the text after that. Yeah, so see you soon, okay? So if I continue, make a little bit more blah blah, and then maybe we can open up to comments, question and answers. So there are many Lojong texts. Sometimes we speak about the three Lojong texts: the short, the middling, and the extensive one. The short one being this text, the 8 verses of thought transformation, the middling one being the 37 practices of a bodhisattva, and the great one, or the long one, being the bodhisattva's way of life, or engaging in a bodhisattva's way of life. So the 37 practices of a bodhisattva are by the Kadampa Geshe Togme Sangpo. It's a very beautiful text of mind transformation. And yeah, the other one is by Shantideva, as you all know. Now, so the rationale behind Lojong, why do we want to make the effort to cherish other living beings like ourselves, or even more than ourselves? Why do we want to put ourselves in other people's shoes? Why do we want to develop empathy? Why do we want to take the lesser, let's say, the lesser seat or the lesser position, and give others priority and so on? You know, this is like from a, let's say, from a evolutionary point, it doesn't make sense, because, you know, how does it benefit you? How does it make your life easier, and how does it make you survive? But of course, from a Dharma point of view, it makes perfect sense, because the very preliminaries of practicing Lojong, as I said, Lojong is like advanced teachings, and there's a lot of preliminaries to do beforehand to see how they make sense and to have the strength of mind to practice them. So it's basically all the points of the Lamrim, of thinking about death and impermanence, how very short and fragile our life is. It is about thinking about the suffering conditions of samsara. It is about thinking about cause and effect, karma, and having a conviction of it. It is about knowing methods for developing patience and practicing generosity and so on. With these as preliminaries, we can really practice Lojong. It makes perfect sense. We see that there is benefit for ourselves and for others. If not, it might look like some kind of self-destructive project, just taking on suffering on yourself, problems on yourself. Of course, we do it. Somebody like me does it mentally. I don't lift a finger for any other person. I'm so selfish. But maybe you live in, society, and you make maybe more efforts for people around you, and why do we make all these efforts for others if it's only harming ourselves. At some point, we will feel we have to give up. I think we will be so frustrated. But from the Dharma point of view, no, it makes perfect sense, because by acting in this way, thinking in this way, and with this attitude, then it will bring benefit to ourselves as well as others. You know, it's like the rationale can be summed up in this verse by Shantideva. The rationale behind the Lojong teachings is can be summed up by when Shantideva says that you know, whatever happiness there is in this world comes from wanting others to be happy. Whatever suffering there is in this world comes from wanting myself to be happy, cherishing myself. And then he says, well, I don't need even to prove this point. Just look at the Buddhas and sentient beings and see the difference between them. And you will see which attitude is wiser. Of course, we might not see the Buddhas. I don't see the Buddhas. My gurus, yes, but we see that, let's say, altruistic beings are motivated more consistently by altruistic attitude and with some wisdom. They seem to be, let's say, more harmonious, more peaceful, have better relationship with others. Yeah, there's some success there. There's definitely success there. While beings who are only cherishing themselves, me, yes, they might, you know, advance socially, because we live in a quite sick society where selfishness is rewarded many times, it seems. But really, if they're happy or not, that's another question. They're always entangled in a lot of problems, it seems, and they often get a very bad reputation in the world. Now, like many politicians, who, yes, quite obviously they're self-centered, they do advance in society, so it looks like self-centeredness makes sense because they're getting what they want. At the same time, they have a bad reputation. They're always embroiled in different problems, like different problems with the how do you say, with the law, with the system, like Donald Trump with all these indictment things, with Benjamin Netanyahu, right, trying to do everything not to go to jail, and etc., etc. We see this also in the world, how the self-centered attitude destroys even beings who are, let's say, successful, who have become successful socially by it. So seeing that all the happiness comes from cherishing others, and all suffering comes from cherishing oneself, we are developing a willingness to practice the Lojong teachings and take the instructions to heart and implement them in daily life. So if we go into the text, the first verse, do you have the text? Everybody has the text? So the first verse says, determined to obtain the greatest possible benefit from all sentient beings who are more precious than a wish fulfilling jewel, I shall hold them most dear at all times. So here one can react to, it says, you know, for example, it says, you know, you have the determination to take the greatest benefit from sentient beings. So I always thought that was a typo. I thought it was some French person who had translated it, because they cannot make distinguishment between from and for. often. It should be for all sentient beings, no? Because you're trying to be a bodhisattva. You're trying, so you want to create benefit for all sentient beings, but it says from all sentient beings. So it almost sounds like you're using sentient beings for your own benefit. So here, the greatest possible benefit is the temporal benefit and the ultimate benefit. Temporal benefit being the high rebirth, and ultimate benefit being liberation and complete enlightenment. Now, in order to achieve that greatest possible benefit or happiness for yourself, you have to interact with others in a good way. So you are getting something from sentient beings by way of interacting with them in a good way.
Can I say something?
Yes?
Because in the Hebrew text, it says for all sentient beings, not from.
Okay.
Exactly. And you know what?
Mm-hmm.
It's a good thing Nomi mentioned that, because all other translations in Hebrew as well say for. And I always thought it was a mistake, and it should be. And now that you mentioned it, the first thing I'll do after our meeting is change the translation from lemaan to me, from for to from, and resend it to everyone. Thank you for that. It really makes sense now. Yeah.
Anyway, the way I think about it, both of them make sense. Because on the one hand, it's like you are by benefiting others with a pure mind, you are getting benefit from others. At the same time, it is for the sake of others. If you're a Mahayana practitioner, it is not for your own self-liberation, but it's for the sake of others. So somehow both of them make sense. Then, it says that we should regard others as more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel. Does anybody know what a wish-fulfilling jewel is? It's, Tal, do you know?
No, I always imagine it is, a kind of a genie in a bottle.
Yeah, exactly.
Something like that.
Yeah, you have to think about Aladdin, I think. So it's a sort of a mystical object, which they say it exists in a certain heavenly celestial realms, that you have a wish-fulfilling tree sometimes, or wish-fulfilling jewel, which fulfills all your material wishes. And who knows, maybe it even exists in the human realm. It seems that the Tibetan and the Indians, they believed it does. I'm not sure. I never come across a wish-fulfilling jewel, but they say these things exist in certain realms, and it can give rise to everything you wish for in a material sense. What it cannot do is that it cannot bring you higher rebirth. It cannot give you deathlessness. So it cannot bring you liberation. It cannot bring you complete enlightenment. And whereas sentient beings, we can for each other. Because we are what we are called field of merits. Each of us is a field of merit to everybody else. So it's a bit like the idea is that the actions that you plant in other sentient beings with a pure attitude will somehow ripen for yourself sooner or later. So when you plant good actions, the seed of good actions, it will ripen through the power of interdependence and some good experiences for yourself. And that, at the same time, you're planting a seed in your own mental continuum. At least maybe, of course, you do it with a good intention. It is misunderstood by others, or they, it's filtered through their consciousness, and so on, but at least you do it with a good motivation, and it's planting a good seed in your own mental continuum, and it will give rise to a good experience in the future. Now, if this virtuous actions are influenced, motivated by a wish for a high rebirth, then this is what it will ripen into, if it's not destroyed by anger and wrong views and so on. If it's motivated by the wish for freedom from samsara, now this is what it will lead to. If it's motivated by bodhicitta, the wish to attain enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings, this is what this action eventually will ripen into. So that is why we put so much emphasis on motivation. It's like, actually, we don't put so much emphasis on motivation. Even if we do a few minutes, we think it's a lot, but it's not so much. Like, I've heard the story by Lama Zopa Rinpoche when he was going into retreat, I think in Lavudu, and together with Venerable Roger, if I'm not mistaken, and they spent a few weeks on the retreat. And then Roger asked if they were finished, something like that. And Rinpoche said, yes, now we're finished with the motivation. Now we begin the retreat. So, meaning that the motivation is so important because it determines the outcome of our actions. So now, in order to be willing to practice virtue with others, we need to cherish others. We need to think of them as valuable, even more valuable than a wish-fulfilling jewel, even more valuable than $1 billion. When we get, like, if somebody gives us if we win the lottery and we get a lot of money, our spontaneous reaction is so much joy, because now we can solve lots of our problems and we can fulfill so many of our wishes. When we meet another sentient being, if I check myself, there's often this kind of hardness in the heart and a sort of indifference. It is not like getting a gift or receiving $1 million. And yet this verse is telling you that when you meet others, when you see others, when you think of others, think of them as being wish-fulfilling jewels. And somebody like me, unfortunately, too many times I think of others as, with indifference, as being a bit like garbage, or as being obstacles for my own happiness. If we really check our mind stream, our continuum during a day, we can see that a lot of the time we are not seeing others as extremely valuable. It's okay, but it's something that Langri Tangpa is encouraging. While he was talking to himself a lot, may I do that, I shall do that, I shall regard others as very valuable. So remembering that when we see others, try to see them as a treasury, a wish-fulfilling jewel, even more precious. Now, how do we cultivate? We need some reasonings or some ways to cultivate the conception or perception as others as being extremely valuable. So Langri Tangpa doesn't explain, so much how to do it. It's more like a pith instruction, but there are many other texts which do, and common sense also tells us to cherish and appreciate others. And so, for example, a text by Nagarjuna called The Dream Tale, he speaks about a few methods. I could extract 7 methods for developing a sense, developing a mind which likes people, which grows fond of people. He says he will teach methods in order to grow fond of sentient beings, in order to like people. One is the one which you have all heard, which is often mentioned in Buddhist teaching, but it's very profound when we think about it and when we use it in our meditation. It can be very profound. And that is that all of us, no matter who we are, want happiness and don't want suffering. And this is completely universal. Regardless of nationality, religion, gender, sexual orientation, whatever, political party, and what species we are, everybody just wants happiness and don't want suffering. So we should check our own experience with this also, how we feel when we are suffering, how we feel with regard to our own death, for example, and our own suffering. And really when it hits us sometimes, when it's more than just words, how unbearable it is. And then understanding that this is exactly the same for everybody else. And by cultivating this awareness, we can be more gentle with others and more harmless with others, and not doing to others, not doing things to others that we don't want them to do to us, as the proverb goes. So Nagarjuna says that in this sense, we are all family. This very fact transcends every every division of religion, nationality, and whatever. In this sense, we are all family. And so it's unsuitable to strive for your own liberation alone. The second method that he's using is saying that since beginningless time, all of us have experienced misery in the lower realms together, and we have experienced happiness in the higher realms together. So we are sort of equal in our experiences, we are sharing experiences, and in this sense, we are family. So I think about it, it's a bit like, I've noticed people that have done the military, and also I noticed in Israel, people that have done the military, that you develop a special bond with the people you have developed the military with, because you shared a lot of hardships together, and you had a similar experience and so on. So with some of them, you meet them, and there's this special connection because you've done something special together for a long time. And it can be the same way in the monastery, that when you work with certain people on certain projects, when you share, you have similar experiences, similar difficulties, as monastics, then there is some kind of bond, some sort of affinity which grows for each other. And then it's the same, of course, in a family where you have the same parents and they went through the same difficulties and the same joys, going to the vacations together and so on. So you develop a special bond together. And Nagarjuna says that we have all experienced all these kind of different sufferings in the lower realms and the happinesses in the upper realms. And in this sense, we are all family. So I should be fond, I should take a liking for others. Now the third one is about thinking how every sentient being has been our mother. Of course, this meditation, we all know from the sevenfold cause and effect training of developing bodhicitta, which the first step is of course, well, when you have done preliminaries and contemplated past lifetimes, and that we have infinite past lifetimes, and we have a little bit of, we have a sense of this, or a faith in this, a conviction in this, and when we have developed an equanimity, we can start to recognize other sentient beings as being our mothers. If I had infinite rebirths, it means that I have had infinite mothers, and each sentient being has at one point served as my mother. Even His Holiness the Dalai Lama has been my mother. I met a lady who had some. She said she had past life memories, and she went to His Holiness. This was in the 80s, before His Holiness had received the Nobel Prize, and she told His Holiness about her experiences. And His Holiness said something like, many people do. So she didn't feel so special anymore. She thought she was unique, and she was very proud. And he cut her pride. He said, you should be able to remember 10,000 lifetimes. Okay. So this lady, she very generously shared her experiences with me. She did not tell me that I could not tell anybody else, so I do. Anyway, she went back to Japan, where she was living. She was not Japanese, but she was living in Japan, working in the embassy. And in Japan, she had a medium. She used to go to a medium to ask questions. And maybe the medium did not know who His Holiness was. I don't know. This was before the Nobel Prize and so on. But anyway, she showed a picture of His Holiness. And she asked the medium, who is this? And the medium said, this was your mother-in-law 10,000 lives ago. You don't know. There's some connection there. Anyway, so we cultivate the conception or perception of others as being our mothers, which is extremely difficult to do from the heart. And then remembering the kindness of our mothers. And this we see around us all the time, how the mother is kind to us, how the mother and the father, for that matter, especially in these, in our culture, where with more gender equality, I think, where the father is also taking more responsibility, but we see how they take care of their young child, how they carry the young child around, how they are distressed when the child screams and is unhappy. I could see with my brother and his girlfriend, who had a child 1 year ago, almost exactly, especially the mother. As soon as the child was screaming, she ran and she went, and to pick him up and to give food and to show comfort. My brother was more like, I go in 5 minutes, so maybe, he would learn. But she was, as soon as the child has a need, she goes. Yeah. Yesterday, I was going to read a little bit and prepare a little bit for the talk. And so I didn't go to the evening puja. We had a Shakyamuni puja. And anyway, so I met the French couple who was coming to the monastery. And everybody was already in the gonpa and so on. And they had their little child, 15 months old, together. And this couple, I think they were living in Bordeaux, but visiting the monastery. And they had many questions on Buddhism. They were really interested and seemed very nice and so on. And so every time the father, the father, then he would ask a question. He was my age. He was in his 30s. And he would ask a question on Dharma, and I would answer. And you would see both of them was so interested. But then the little child of 15 months old, he would run away. And the mother, she had to go after him. So she could not hear the answer. And the guy was there, and he was listening, and I was talking a bit from my heart. And then when I had finished, she came back. And then they asked another question, and the same thing happened, and she was running after. Then I think after maybe the third or the fourth time, the dad, he went after the child, so she could hear a little, but it was not the same thing. And I was thinking about this thing, something which Lord Buddha, he says in the Filial Piety Sutra, where he talks about the kindness of the mother, especially about the mother. And he says something like, because he's walking outside with his sangha of monks, and they come across a pile of bones beside the road, and Lord Buddha, he prostrates to the bones. And then Ananda, the attendant, he says, "But what are you doing? You are the world transcendent one. You are the great teacher. You are the one that the gods and humans worship. And now you're prostrating in the dust to a pile of bones." And Lord Buddha, he says, although this assembly of monks is, my foremost disciples, you have still not learned a lot. You have still not understood things deeply. Now, these bones, at one point, these bones are the sentient beings who once was my mother. And he talks about the kindness of the mother, and that is why I prostrate to the bones. And then Ananda, he says, but Lord, when we are alive, you can clearly distinguish who is a female and who is a male by way of their looks and the way they do their hair, and if they have makeup or not, and their dresses and so on. But when they're dead and they're just bones, it's impossible to distinguish. Bones are bones, they look alike. And Lord Buddha says something like, there is a difference. And he explains the bones of females, that the females, they take so much responsibility for the child and for the home, and they work a lot, so they go through a lot of hardships, and this affects even their bone structure and even the color of their bones, so that the bones grow even darker, and it was thicker or thinner, I can't remember, and smaller, and so on. So the hardships that the mother goes through affect even right down to the skeleton. While the men, they spend easier time in the temple and listening to teachings and increasing their wisdom so that they can counteract afflictive emotions and so on. And their bones are white and strong, and etc., etc. And this is how you can tell the difference. And when he says that, it says that at Ananda and the other disciples, it's like somebody put a knife in the heart. At that point, they realized the privileged. At that point, they realized the privilege they had as monks and as spiritual practitioners, and the kind of kindness that their own mothers had show them, and they all feel like they're criminals, because they have not put enough effort in spiritual practice, and they have not done it enough for the sake of others. And then Lord Buddha goes on about the kindness of the mother, how the mother experiences pain while giving birth, and immediately forgets her pain while giving birth, and instead just feels love for the child. So you who are mothers, from personal experience. I have no clue. They don't, like one, I recently read some remark which Geshe Lekten, he made about that he find it very astonishing that when the mother gives birth to the child and experiences so much pain in the childbirth, she's not angry and she doesn't throw away the child like a piece of garbage, but instead she cherishes the child and shows him so much love, the very cause of her pain. And yes, and this continues, that a lot of the time the children, they give so much trouble to the parents, and still the parents just keep cherishing and loving the child. So by reflecting on the kindness of our mother and then extending that to other sentient beings, we develop love and compassion and a sense of that others are really valuable, even though they are strangers to us in this. Many of them are strangers to us in this life, or they have never done such kind things to us as our mother or father has done to us in this life, or then, at least in past lifetimes, they have done all these kind of things, wiped away our feces and urine, run after us when we were discovering the world, thinking about us 24/7, thinking about us even when we're grown-ups, when we're doing our own things, our own career, traveling, being monks, whatever. They are still, as long. Lord Buddha, he says in this Filial Piety Sutra that, the parents, they don't stop thinking about their child until their last breath. And this is probably often true. And yet we don't repay the kindness. So that's then the third point, that the wish to repay the kindness. We are starting to feel this, I have been the recipient of so much kindness, and now I want to repay it to others. That leads us to the fourth point, which is about called it's a special sort of loving kindness, which views everybody as beautiful. So the beautiful sort of loving kindness. It's not just any loving kindness. It's not immeasurable loving kindness, but it's a beautiful sort of loving kindness. So seeing every being as like beautiful and dear, than as a wish-fulfilling jewel. So this is how we can see others as a wish-fulfilling jewel. When we have that perception or conception of others, and we have an awareness of suffering, then we can also start to feel that the suffering of others is difficult to bear, it's unbearable, and we want to do something for others, whatever it is, whatever we need to do in our life to alleviate the suffering of others and bring them happiness, we want to do just that, because we are holding them dear. Just as we as a parent or as a child, if we really love our parents or children, then when they have problems, we feel a sort of an obligation or an urge to do what we can to help them, within our limitations, and even to increase our capacity so that we can help them more. Should we stop here for some questions? Or should I continue with the methods of developing fondness of sentient beings? Maybe it's better with some questions or some comments to make it a bit interactive, so it's not too boring for you.
I would like to continue with the 8 verses, if it's okay.
With the 8 verses?
Like
Okay.
we started just with the 1.
We just started with the 1, yes. I'm not very fast, and I'm happy I'm not very fast, because usually can explain these 8 verses in just 1 hour, even less. Okay, so how we continue then to develop conception perception of others as being more valuable than a wish-fulfilling jewel in our daily life, how to think about others. So Nagarjuna also says a fourth method is to think about that, me as a Buddhist, I admire the Buddha. I admire the qualities of the Buddha, and I feel some connection to the Buddha or to my teachers, and maybe I feel some blessing coming from them as well, that practicing the Buddhist teaching has benefited me, and so I feel admiration for the Buddhas. I cherish the Buddhas. Now, the best way to repay the kindness of the Buddhas and to worship the Buddhas is to serve sentient beings. It is not to make elaborate and expensive offerings. It is not to go into retreats. It is not to do this and that, whatever. It is not to make, speak about your guru's qualities and the Buddha's qualities and so on, but it's about cherishing other sentient beings. That is the best offering. So I'm not making that up just from my own, whimsical mind, but it's, you can find these kind of quotations in Shantideva's Bodhisattva Sharavatara. I also saw a quote in Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche's Heart of Compassion. It's a commentary on the 37 practices, where Lord Buddha himself says that the best way to worship me is to serve sentient beings. Those who are having compassion and serving sentient beings are worshiping me. Those who are not, those who are harming them, are displeasing me, and they are not worshiping me. So then, when we make the welfare of others, we try to make that our priority, out of admiration for the Buddhas. Then contemplating the law of cause and effect, that by benefiting others, we know that we will experience happiness, and by harming them, we will experience suffering. So every suffering from, the light suffering of every suffering is said to come from harming sentient beings, or breaking our, let's say, our commitments, our vows, by harming sentient beings. So, in order to scare us a bit, but scare us not to harm others, they speak about the sufferings of the lower realms, of the hell beings, of being whipped and having our flesh lacerated from our bones and being dipped in acid fluids and being impaled and being crushed and burned and frozen down, tormented in every possible conceivable, inconceivable way. That comes from harming sentient beings, from regarding sentient beings as garbage and harming them. The suffering of hunger ghost, of starving and not having food, not having drink, and always being in a craving state of mind, again, comes from not cherishing others, but from harming others, from stealing and from being miserly and not sharing with others, letting others die of hunger and poverty and whatever. And the suffering of the animals, the fear of being eaten alive, of being chased, of being the slave of others and so on, and being extremely ignorant, comes from having an ignorant mind and an indifferent mind, a sort of sluggish mind, a mind which is indifferent to others, and which is sort of harming others and with a sort of an indifferent state. So all the sufferings comes from harming sentient beings, not cherishing them, whereas all the pleasures, from the pleasures of the human beings, the privileges that we may have as human beings, the resources, the good food, the exciting travels, the nice dresses, the fresh air, whatever we are enjoying, and even more the beauty and the pleasures of the godly realms, these come from cherishing others. So, by contemplating the effects, we want to cherish others and not to harm them in any way. And this is a method for thinking about others as more precious than a wishful jewel. And then contemplating that we need others, we are in a desperate need of others. We think we're independent, that we don't need others, oftentimes, and that's how our foolish mind functions, at least me, If I need somebody, yes, then, there's the conception, oh, they're so valuable, they're so precious, blah, blah, blah. They're so nice. Either if I need them or if they praise me and being kind to me. But if not, if they're not sort of in my project, in my scheme of things, they're this kind of, let's say, indifference. I cannot use them. I don't need them. Or they have not praised me or whatever. So there's sort of an indifference there. But as, let's say, an aspirant bodhisattva, somebody who's admiring the bodhisattva attitude and the bodhisattva ideal, we need others for our practice. Without others, there's no possibility to practice the perfection of generosity. Whom, if not sentient beings, would we practice the generosity of giving material things? With whom would we practice the generosity of giving protection from fear and dangers? With whom would we give to whom would we give the Dharma? So, thinking about this, how we need others to practice just like generosity, we see that just as, let's say, a beggar is in need of my help, I am actually in much more need of the help of the beggar to be able to practice generosity. Just as the person who asked me for a favor is in need of my help, I am in need of his requiring me to give generosity of my time, my effort, protection. Just as, and we continue reasoning like that. And in this kind of way, we can help others and practice generosity with others with a humble attitude, thinking about the interdependence of it. It's not like, that the other person is only in a dependent situation and I am in the sort of the giving independent situation. And the same way, when I am in need of something, I can ask others, of course, without exploiting in any way, but I can ask others, or if others offer something to me to help with this and that, then to accept and not to reject out of, let's say, pride or a sense of independence or whatever, but to accept with the awareness that the other person is practicing generosity. It's good for the other person as well. So sometimes what it happens with some, let's say, some practitioners, they accept an offering, but then they immediately give it away, either to you or to somebody else. Sometimes they keep it for themselves, sometimes they don't, and they give it away. It's different from different. So from our side, we should be like, I think, just have pure perception, whatever. But this being able to give, seeing that we need others to give, but also being able to receive from others, allowing others to practice generosity.
I wanted to ask, not to ask, maybe just to comment that sometimes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sometimes I myself get confused between, I think I'm like practicing generosity for myself. Like when I'm self-cherishing myself, I try to give myself things or things that I want. And sometimes I know the difference between generosity to others it's a different feeling in the heart. Like when you give something to someone else, it's a bit a different feeling than you give something to yourself. But I think we have a lot of habit to give to yourself. So it's sometimes confusing. When you give to yourself, it's also a pleasant feeling. And when you give to someone else, also a pleasant feeling. So sometimes it's confusing to like what is better, like what is
Both,
I don't know.
both are good. You treat others with loving kindness and compassion, and you treat yourself with loving kindness and compassion. So both are good. And sometimes, you know, you have people who are extremely miserly with others, but they're equally miserly with themselves. And I don't know. I don't know if this is somehow related. And in the same way, people that are very generous with others, and they're very generous with themselves as well. I don't see a problem. So, like, I think both are good, and both give a pleasant feeling. And I think when you're practicing generosity with others, then you can practice it with yourself without any bad conscience. Even as, let's say, a Dharma practitioner and wanting to aspire somehow to be a Bodhisattva and so on, you can be generous with yourself with good conscience, because you're knowing that you're not treating others lesser than yourself. You're also not treating yourself lesser than others. Something like this. Anyway, Shantideva, he says something that if we have to choose between the two, as a bodhisattva at least, it would be better to give to others. This like more fulfills, you know, our aspiration for Buddhahood, or even for, let's say, precious human rebirth. So when you have the last piece of cake and there are two people, then to offer it to the neighbor, that's something very nice, and it's a good, like an easy way to start to practice, you know, less self-cherishing. You're putting the interest of the other person first with some object which is easier to give. He says that, you know, if I give this to others, what will I have for myself? This is the thinking of a hungry ghost. And then he says, if I use this for myself, then what will I have to give to others? This is the thinking of a god. So when we have to choose, when we're in the dilemma, maybe it's better to put priority to others. But it doesn't mean that you have to neglect yourself in any way and that you cannot be generous with yourself. Yeah. So we need others to practice the 6 perfections. Remembering this, we can really start to view others as more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel. Like Shantideva also says with regard to the person, you know, who we have to practice patience with, the troublemaker. And here we really have to understand that the troublemaker is not the one that comes and robs us on the street or punches us in the face and so on. Many times it's much more subtle than that, right, in our daily life. You know, it's the person whom we give some help and they respond with, you know, a little bit not so nice remark, or they're not feeling showing any aspect of gratitude, or it's the person who is late to a meeting for whatever it is which is causing us trouble. Many times the objects of patience are more subtle than the one which is hurting us in a very coarse way. So he says, you know, he says that these people which are harming us in some way, and who are even the ones, he says, the ones that are spreading a bad reputation of us, talking badly to us behind our back, etc. They are not obstacles to creating merit. They are not obstacles to enlightenment. He says that the beggar is not an obstacle to practicing generosity, And the habit is not an obstacle to getting ordination. Now, if the Buddha, he said that the highest form of ascetic practice is patience, then how can you say that the troublemaker is an obstacle to creating merit for you? No, it's only your own mind which is the obstacle for creating merit and purifying negativity. So you need the troublemakers for practicing the 6 perfections. So everybody somehow are more valuable than a wish-fulfilling jewel, fulfilling your collections of merit and wisdom. And then finally, the 7th method for growing fond of sentient beings. It's a bit related to this, of course, with the 6 perfections and everything we've seen, but it's about that all the cities or great attainments that we can develop as practitioners depend on sentient beings. Because the great attainments, such as the 5 clairvoyances, liberation, enlightenment, all the great attainments that we could ever dream of, and the bliss of meditative equipoise, this comes from a great collection of merit, and a great collection of merit comes from serving sentient beings. So in this way, sentient beings are extremely precious, and they are the source of cities of great attainments. It is not only about your Lama, your Guru, which is giving you the blessing because you are practicing Guru Yoga, etc. No, it's about you creating an altruistic intention and developing a mind cherishing others and creating the collection of merit based on that. Based on that, you can develop the great cities. By using these 7 methods, or even just one of them, we can start to develop the mind which is cherishing others more than a wish-fulfilling jewel. Okay. So we can stop here for today and do is there a question? Should we take a question of 5 minutes before we do the dedications? Or a remark? Otherwise, we do the dedication. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that regarding the translation that Lama Zopa Rinpoche did here, his translation is very different from what the other translations did, because he doesn't use it as a prayer, you know, like, may I be this and that. No, Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, I'm determined to do this.
Yes.
So in a way, it's one step forward. He's taking us to a place where just do it, you know. We are doing this. We are not just wishing to do it, but no, we are doing it.
Exactly.
And it's very different from the other translations that I read. I like it, you know, the determination. So,
actually, it's how Geshe Langri Tangpa wrote it himself, apparently. But then afterwards, they changed it. They changed the 8 verses to be like, may I, and so on. So by stepping one, he's going back to the source. Yeah, thank you for that. It's true. So we do the prayer then, and increasing our bodhicitta motivation, remembering that the purpose of our life is to dispel the unhappiness of others by dispelling the causes of the suffering. So whatever virtue that we have accumulated, may have accumulated, it's for the sake of doing just that. And the way to do that in the most beneficial way is most effective way is to attain Buddhahood. And for that purpose, we need to develop bodhicitta. So it's on page 23, right? So we can just think along those lines that I said, dedicating our energy towards the goal of complete enlightenment for the benefit of all beings, and that we ourselves may act as servants of others. May the precious supreme bodhicitta not yet born arise. May that arisen not decline, but increase more and more. And then to realize emptiness, we know that the only way to really stop, put an end to suffering, the afflictive emotions, is to cut the self-grasping mind in our heart. And to do that, we need to realize ultimate reality, the true nature of the phenomena around us and of ourselves, our aggregates, which is their lack of independent or inherent existence. So we dedicate this energy to be able to achieve that wisdom. May the precious view of emptiness not yet born arise. May that arisen not decline, but increase more and more. And then we go to His Holiness Long Life prayer, remembering the kindness of His Holiness, that He has dedicated His whole life for the benefit of sentient beings, upholding and spreading the Dharma, and benefiting sentient beings in the most profound way, the only way really possible, by way of teaching the methods to find happiness and to reduce suffering. So we request His Holiness to have a long, long life and to continue to spread the Dharma, teach the Dharma, and to please not to pass into parinirvana, but to take rebirth again and again for the sake of disciples, and again reveal the Dharma and guide us towards complete enlightenment. Incomparably kind and supreme Tenzin Gyatso, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, you have a long life and all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Savior of the snowland teachings and transmigratory beings, who extensively clarifies the path that unifies emptiness and compassion, to the lotus holder Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then if we have a connection with Lama Rinpoche, we can also make our own prayer for Rinpoche to swiftly return into this world and to please again spreading the Dharma in the most pure possible way. To again please dedicate his life for the well-being of others. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For coming.
You, Tenzin. We'll meet again next week, actually. right? Next Saturday, we have another meeting.
Okay, next week?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So then we meet next Saturday, same time. I hope things go well over there. But I hope you succeed in your struggle with the demonstrations and so on. And that you are able to, in your own way, in your own life, spread more peace, gentleness, kindness, truthfulness. Because those are really, as you know, they are the causes for creating harmonious society. And that you have determination to keep your democracy and the good conditions that you have in Israel. Thank you so much, and see you. I hope to see you all next week, if you're all still alive and everything works out. And thank you so much, Tal, for inviting me to give this talk, and also to Yael for recommending me. So kind. Even though she knows me that I don't know much. Okay. Have a good day.
Thank you. See you next
Thank you
week.
so much.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.